Hello and welcome to the January 2011 Clinical Research Consortium. I'm Dr. Leonard Matheson, a neurorehabilitation psychologist in St. Louis, Missouri at Epic Rehab. Today's talk is an introduction to executive dysfunction and work capacity evaluation. Let's begin by defining work capacity evaluation. The important point that I'd like to make here is that work capacity includes both physical capacity and cognitive capacity. Work capacity evaluation's focus on physical work has got to be expanded to include cognitive work. I first developed work capacity evaluation at Rancho Los Amigos Hospital in Downey, California in the mid-1970s. The focus then did include both physical capacity and cognitive capacity, but there was a general tendency to make our focus on physical capacity. And when we took it out into the community, we primarily worked with people who had physical capacity limitations, typically people with musculoskeletal injuries. But there were always people there who had problems with cognitive capacity. And now we need to really get back to a broad look at work capacity evaluation that includes both physical and cognitive demands. As we expand our WCE focus, we need to ask a couple of questions. What are the cognitive analogs of physical capacity, and how can they be measured? The most important cognitive issue has to do with executive function. Executive function harnesses and directs intelligence and all of the other cognitive capacities. Executive function is the ability to integrate various component cognitive abilities to produce meaningful task performance. Executive dysfunction is the relative inability to devise novel responses, suppress habitual responses, identify and correct errors, and plan, organize, and initiate new solutions to challenging tasks. Executive functions are distinguished from basic cognitive functions such as auditory and visual processing and long-term memory. Executive functions are higher order abilities that control emotional responses and provide coordination and integration of the basic cognitive processes. Now, there are two different groups of executive function: those that have to do with emotional and behavioral self-control, and those that are metacognitive, have to do with the coordination of individual cognitive components. Both are crucial when we take a look at work capacity evaluation. Both are necessary to consider as we assist the client to return to work. Let's take a closer look at both of these. The emotional behavioral executive functions have to do with the person's ability to get along with coworkers and customers, clients or patients, which is necessary in almost every job. The four main areas in emotional behavioral executive function have to do with impulse inhibition, cognitive flexibility, emotional control, and self-awareness. The other major group of executive functions has to do with metacognitive coordination. This has to do with the person directing their attention to select short-term and procedural memories and to integrate those with long-term memory and sensory input to perform a task. The five major areas that we look at in terms of metacognitive coordination are initiation, working memory, planning and organizing, task monitoring, and the person's ability to organize materials. So, what is the scope of the problem of executive dysfunction? We aren't sure of the annual incidence of executive dysfunction, but awareness is rapidly growing. New technologies provide more sensitive indicators of traumatic brain injury, so that we have fewer false negative tests of executive dysfunction. In addition, the increased visibility of post-traumatic executive dysfunction problems in otherwise healthy veterans helps to increase public awareness. Another approach to the annual incidence of executive dysfunction is to take a look at the estimate of problems with executive function after a stroke or TBI, which most people agree ranges from 15% to 25%. Now, in the United States, there are 1.4 million to 1.7 million traumatic brain injuries every year. There are about 800,000 cerebrovascular strokes every year. In Canada, the estimate is about 160,000 traumatic brain injuries each year and about 50,000 cerebrovascular strokes. If we take a look at the prevalence of these problems in the United States, there are at least 5.3 million Americans living with TBI, and about 5.8 million Americans who've had a stroke. 48% of these are younger than 65 years of age and therefore likely to be accessible to the labor market. Remember, executive dysfunction is also experienced by people with Asperger syndrome, schizophrenia, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease. So how do we evaluate cognitive capacity and work disability? Can the current neuropsychological, occupational therapy, and speech-language findings be interpreted in terms of work disability? And the honest answer is that not as well as is presumed by the public. For example, let's take a look at IQ, the intelligence quotient. Is IQ equal to cognitive capacity? Well, IQ is attractive because it is simple, is analogous to fitness as measured by a cardiac stress test or other performance potential measures. It's been widely studied in relationship to minimum demands of certain occupations, and it's measurable with standardized tests that have normative data. But IQ is inadequate because it's measured briefly in a controlled environment. It describes what a person can do in unusual circumstances, not in normal situations. It's culturally biased. And it's controlled by one profession, creating service delivery bottlenecks and unnecessary expense. And so one response to this is to take a look at work-oriented executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction limits how inherent cognitive capacity is displayed in the world of work. Performance in response to simulated work reflects the consequences of executive dysfunction on inherent cognitive capacity. The person's ability to handle simulated work is a good reflection of executive dysfunction, much better than their inherent cognitive capacity. Another approach to take is a cognitive functional capacity evaluation that's analogous to a physical FCE. A cognitive FCE must be broad-based, described by factor analysis of the occupation's demands. This allows us to compare the person to the demands of the job and focuses on what the person can do in a work environment. Cognitive FCE testing can use these approaches. First, comprehensive aptitude batteries included in the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the Differential Aptitude Test Battery, and the Employee Aptitude Survey Test Battery. Cognitive FCE testing can also use structured work samples and semi-structured situational assessments. To the degree that the evaluation task is less structured, we get a better handle on executive dysfunction because we give the evaluee latitude to demonstrate executive function. Now, the basic idea here is that to the degree that we give the evaluee a less structured task, we learn more about their executive dysfunction because it gives the client more opportunities to demonstrate executive function to solve whatever problems we're presenting to the person. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because next month we're going to take a closer look at evaluating vocational executive dysfunction based in part on that idea. I'll introduce you to the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, the Behavioral Assessment of Vocational Skills called the BAVS, which is also known as the Wheelbarrow Task, the Doll Chair Assembly Task, or DCAT, which is part of the suite of simulated work activities at the Goldilocks Chair Company, and the Structured Work Activity Group Number 1, or SWAG, that we developed at the Washington University School of Medicine Program in Occupational Therapy. SWAG 1 focuses on work activities at the St. Francis International Library. In the meantime, I'd like to point you to a resource that I think you'll find very useful. My good friend and colleague, Tanya Percy, is presenting a workshop on cognitive FCE, sponsored by Matheson Education and Training Solutions. You can find information for the date and location on the web. So, thank you for participating with us in the Clinical Research Consortium. Contact us at mathesondevelopment.com. I'm Len Matheson, signing off. Take care.